engage Victorians on the important issues facing our city. And in many ways, you could say that housing affordability is arguably the most important issue facing our city. For many of us, housing affordability is a challenge. For most of us, it's a problem in some way, and for too many of us, housing affordability is a crisis. The goal of tonight's forum is to better understand the challenge of housing affordability and to look at ways to solve the problem. Now, the question of housing affordability is, of course, very complex, and there's many ways you can look at it, many angles you can take. We've decided tonight to break it down into 3 topics. So first, we're going to look at how did we get here, and we're going to have a presentation on a very brief history of housing policy in Canada and BC. Second, we're going to look at where are we now. We're going to look at the current state of housing affordability and homelessness in Greater Victoria. And third, how do we move forward? How do we solve this problem? So we're going to look at what are some of the best practices in solving the problem of housing affordability. To address these topics, we have 4 excellent speakers. We're very grateful that they all volunteered their time tonight. So on the first topic, how did we get here? The history of housing policy. We're going to hear from Linda Allen. Linda is a co-founder and managing partner of City Spaces Consulting. She has 4 decades of professional experience. She plays a role in many of City Spaces projects, coordinating and providing advice to her clients and colleagues in the area of applied research and strategic planning, with an emphasis on affordable housing, community planning, local governance, and public and stakeholder engagement. Second, we're going to hear from Bernie Hawley on the current state of housing affordability and homelessness in Victoria. Bernie is an associate professor at Hugo School of Nursing and a scientist at the Centre for Addictions Research in BC. She was a member of the Mayor's Task Force on breaking the cycle of homelessness, mental illness, and addictions, and since 2008 has worked with the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness to produce an annual report on housing and supports. She's also a member of the Canadian Homelessness Researcher Network and has conducted research on solutions to homelessness, including transitional housing and managed alcohol programs. Third, on the question of best practices in affordable housing solutions, we're going to hear from Marika Albert and Melliship. Marika is the program manager for the Community Social Planning Council of Greater Victoria's Poverty Reduction and Prevention Initiatives. She conducts research on housing affordability, poverty reduction and prevention strategies, and monitors and reports on socioeconomic trends in BC's capital region. Before coming to council, Marika worked as a research analyst at BC Stats and as a research associate for the Prairie Centre Society. And last, we'll hear from Kay Melliship. Kay has been the executive director of the Greater Victoria Housing Society for over 8 years. Prior to joining the society, she worked for the provincial government, private consulting firms, and the University of BC. Kay also serves on the boards of directors of the BC Non-Profit Housing Association, as well as Ready to Rent. So the format for tonight, we'll hear from our speakers, and then we'll take a very short break, invite our 4 speakers on stage to kind of follow up on each other's points and continue the conversation. And then we will have time for your comments and questions. We hope that we will have many. And then after that, we have the venue for an hour or 2 after that, so we encourage you all to stay, grab a drink, and continue the discussion informally. It's a great chance to converse and network. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our speakers, the first of whom is Linda Allen.
This actually could take an entire university lecture. I promise you I won't do that. And I do have a number of people in the audience who will hold me accountable if I have something out of order. I understand this is a very important topic throughout the region, throughout British Columbia, throughout Canada. Many places are challenged by affordability issues. So my topic tonight is the history of housing programs. And what we'll be talking about, next slide, is really, it's been very interesting since the 1930s and 40s to see how the federal government's role has consistently diminished, certainly since the post-1992 period. We'll be talking a bit about the provincial government, partners, enablers with limited money to give the BC government full marks. They have been working with scarce resources and have been very resourceful in trying to find ways to add to the supply of affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit about the regional context. This region has been, CRD in particular, and the Housing Corporation have been extremely proactive. And since that organization was set up in 1983, has produced quite a bit of affordable housing for families, for singles, for seniors, and people with disabilities. And finally, if I have time, talk a bit about the municipal context. So, I really wasn't around in the 1940s, but my parents were. And it was an extremely interesting time in terms of what the federal government tackled. This is certainly during wartime. There were over almost 50,000 dwellings were built across the country in very short order. There were also rent controls at that time. And at that period of time, we really were, as Canadians, more a society of renters than homeowners. The federal government brought in the National Housing Act, and that really was a declaration of involvement and social responsibility for making sure that we have adequate, affordable housing for people whose incomes are not being able to participate fully in the private market. There was additional legislation in 1945, including the Veterans Rental Housing Program. There's a little photo there. Some of those homes still exist. I'm not sure there are too many left in Victoria. But they certainly housed many people, again, across the country. And at that time, there was also conditions in some of our bigger cities were quite grim. And there was a beginning of money being put towards significant amounts of urban renewal and slum clearance. And during the period up to 1964, the federal government continued to be very significant in its role in housing. But it started to shift towards a focus on home ownership. And we've since then, that period of time, we really have turned into a nation of homeowners. There's a hugely significant change in perspective. So at that time too, the City of Toronto decided that it definitely had some issues that couldn't be solved without some municipal funding. And it started moving into significant redevelopment of areas. I'm sure some of you are aware of Cabbagetown and the redevelopments that have occurred there. So moving along to 1992, during that period of time, there were very, very significant changes in the National Housing Act, and really the provincial governments became significantly involved. This was a period where there was excellent funding from the federal government, so there were loans for nonprofit corporations, be they municipal or organizational, community-based organizations. There was lots of money at that time for urban renewal and for provincial-federal partnerships. It really has been, at that period of time, was a turning point because the provincial governments became increasingly involved in housing. And it really was an excellent period of time where the federal and provincial governments, not every provincial government, but certainly a number of them worked very successfully together. Now, I'm not going to take you through each of those programs, and in fact, I can't remember half of them myself, but there were a number of, really great programs. They were founded in policy, again, of we need to ensure that we have adequate supply of affordable income for low and moderate households. And some of these have come and gone, some of them still exist. But if you can see this graph, it tells an incredible story. This was a period to 1992 where there was a huge amount of, I'm sure some of you have heard the word co-op housing, non-profit housing corporations, and a variety of special needs housing. But after that, the federal government said, enough, we will continue funding those units that we have already built, but there's no new money for housing or increased housing supply. So in the BC situation, the government here reacted by being very proactive. And certainly BC Housing was given increasing responsibilities and increasing resources. This was the time of the NDP government in the mid-1990s, and there were significant policy initiatives, including the Commission on Housing Options and changes in the legislation. Trying to express any political agenda here. This is the minister responsible for housing, Coleman, and to its credit, the BC government has continued to fund some programs along the way. It's been very inventive and innovative, but the numbers of actually increasing the supply have been relatively small. So moving away from building new housing, what has been happening in terms of the demand side measures. And I won't go into all of those, but those are really, they're important components of our housing policies and programs. And they provide a direct subsidy or some sort of supplement to a number of people to assist them to remain in their homes. So some of you may be aware of the SAFER program, for example, which is offered in British Columbia. And about 4 years ago, the rental assistance program was established for low and moderate income families. There are a number of others. I can see them on the screen. I won't mention them now. So quickly turning to the regional context, the Capital Regional Housing Corporation, which I mentioned, was established about 30 years ago. And because it was at a time when it was established, it was a time of great opportunity to work with federal funds, and a considerable amount of housing was built at that time. Since then, the programs have dwindled, and the CRHC has been largely managing its own portfolio for families, seniors, and people with special needs. This, however, this picture is a new initiative of CRHC, which is the Virgo townhouses. Very interesting project, new rental project in Sandwich, which also includes a secondary suite in a number of the rental units. So the other things that are going on regionally, certainly from a planning perspective, the Capital Regional District produced a housing strategy in 2008 and set some very interesting goals and objectives for local governments regionally to move forward on. Langford's inclusionary housing policy you may be familiar with, and right now the regional sustainability strategy is being developed, and it has a lot of housing material in it, and that will be coming forward, I think, sometime for engagement in the summer or maybe early fall. There are also some housing action plans that have been undertaken or have not necessarily been adopted, but a fair bit of needs assessment has been undertaken. The City of Victoria has been very proactive in continuing to research and develop housing policy. This is a whole 15, 20, 30 minutes in and of itself, so I won't spend much time on it, but basically local governments, municipalities do have a number of tools. They have policy, financial tools, regulatory tools, and increasingly playing a role in partnerships with community-based organizations, other levels of government, foundations to be able to produce additional housing supply. Municipal governments also have a really important role to play in education, advocacy, and capacity building, and so do community organizations like yours. So, just in conclusion, where we're at now, well, there isn't much money, provincial or federal money around to increase the supply, and governments are increasingly relying on demand-side measures. Local governments have increasingly come to the table, and I've worked throughout British Columbia in communities of various sizes, and even the smallest communities see that, the smallest municipalities see that they have a really important role to play in housing. So the capital regional municipalities, if you're familiar with the Housing Trust Fund, it's a very nationally recognized program, very innovative, and it receives money from all municipalities in order to have a pot of money to support additional supply construction. And finally, creative partnerships are the essence of building new affordable housing, and certainly that has been the case in a number of organizations here, either community-based service clubs, faith-based groups, and other organizations to produce really affordable housing supply. So I would encourage you as a residents association to not only learn about these programs, but to see what you have to bring to the table to increase the supply of affordable housing. Thank you.
And I just wanted to, if you just go to the next slide, just tell you a little bit about the Social Planning Council. We've been around since 1936. We were developed as a response to what was happening in the Great Depression. And community members came together to address the fact that a lot of people in their community were struggling, and they knew that collectively the community could do something together about that. We organize our work into 4 different pillars of work. We look at poverty prevention and reduction, housing affordability, community economic development, and sustainability, which is a very broad topic. But today, next slide please. I'm going to tell you about a report and a study that we did last fall. And we released the findings of this study, which was looking at promising policies and practices that local governments can take up to support nonprofit and affordable market housing development. So we really focused on rental market housing particularly, but we also explored some options for co-op housing and non-market housing as well. So the study emerged out of widespread, I'm going to just walk away from the mic, so I was figuring out how to fall down. So I'm just going to stand right here, and if you guys can't hear me, just let me know. I feel much more comfortable like this. So the study emerged out of a widespread and shared concern that the supply of affordable market housing required renewed attention across the region. And both Linda and Bernie really made that point. It was very clear. I don't really need to go into it too much. But the overall objective of the study was to collect information on what is already happening in the region and then what was happening outside of the region to kind of inspire us and to inform local government policy development. And we had 4 main objectives to the study, and one was to inform the regional sustainability strategy. One was to just have a standalone report also to inform the public about what kind of policies are out there, what our municipalities are doing in the region, going to draw out some of the highlights and promising practices that I found through the course of this study. If any of you would like to talk to me about the other results, I'd be happy to at another time. But right now, I think it's important to talk about the policy, so you can just, So defining affordability. Bernie touched on this, but I think we can't really say this enough, how we define housing affordability. So for this study, we used the standard definition that's used by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And the standard is applied to both renter and owner households. So again, it's that shelter costs do not exceed 30% of a household's before tax income, and that the housing is suitable and it's adequate. You can go to the next slide, please. Oh, one thing I'd also like to add is that when we talk about affordability, it's really important to also look at the spectrum of incomes that we have in our communities. Because when we're talking about affordability for households that have an income that's around 80% of the median income, so just below, we're usually talking about rental housing, right? But if we're talking about a household that's just above, maybe 20% above, there may be options for creative solutions around ownership. But I'm going to be mostly focusing on rental housing. So the context, as a researcher, I think it's really important that we ground our work in what's actually happening in our communities and what the context is. So we know that homeownership is increasingly becoming out of reach for median and below median income households. And the Federation of Canadian Municipalities recently released a report, last year, that said that the average price to purchase a home doubled between 2001 and 2010, while household incomes have not kept up the same pace. So when we see a massive increase in how much it actually costs to own a home, and our incomes are not. I did a rough calculation last year about what our mean incomes are and how much purchasing power we've lost. Over the past 10 years, we've lost about 9% of our purchasing power. So as inflation goes up, our incomes are actually meeting that, which is an issue. So rental demand and core housing need projections from a recent study that the nonprofit Housing Association did. These are based on 2006 census data and BC Stats population projections. And what we can see is that core housing need among renters is projected to increase by 19 to 27%. Now you're going to say, that's a very wide range, but researchers are careful and statisticians are careful. We say we can't actually predict hard, solid numbers, but we can say that this is still a fairly large increase. Nothing to ignore. Low income rates are generally higher for rental households than they are for ownership households. We know that from looking at 10 years of census data. And we also know that affordable rental housing isn't really being developed at an appropriate rate to keep up with demand. So, according to the same Federation of Municipalities report I just mentioned, tenant households make up 1/3 of all households across Canada.
I'm just wondering the second point there, the 19 to 27%.
Yeah.
Are you saying, is that just population growth, or is that over and above the population growth?
They took population growth into account when they did their projections, so yeah. Let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, so tenant households make up about 1/3 of the population of all households across Canada, while rental housing construction starts account for only 10% of all housing starts over the past 15 years. So again, the same point made over and over again, that we're not getting rental housing is not being built at the rate that it seems that we need to be building it at. So next slide, please. So if some of you live in Fernwood, you're familiar with this building. It's on Cook Street, pretty close to George Day Elementary School. And I thought I'd use this for this part of my presentation because I'm looking at policy that municipalities can use to preserve affordable housing stock. If we see that it's deteriorating, maybe there's something that we can do to at least negate that deterioration. One of the things that municipalities can do is institute standards of maintenance bylaws, particularly for rental properties. And these laws allow local governments to force landlords to maintain their rental properties. And this includes multi-unit complexes, secondary suites, detached homes, and condos. And so to ensure the safety and the well-being of the tenants. Although these are not without their challenges, a study conducted by CMHC identified that while it's a useful tool, standards of maintenance bylaws generally tend to only ensure the minimum standard of maintenance. However, there are policy changes that can be made at the provincial level to provide municipalities with more power to with enforcement tools, and also provide incentives for landlords to maintain their buildings. So those are just a couple of examples. In Saskatoon, some of the maintenance, standard maintenance bylaws, inspections are done actually by the fire department. So the fire department usually has to go and do regular inspections anyways, and so they just have that as part of their work, so there's not a separate enforcement tool in place. Housing agreements are also another tool that municipalities can use. They are contractual agreements between housing developers and municipalities, and they are often considered public-private partnerships. And the agreement generally covers the tenure of the unit, the availability of units for specific groups, for instance, seniors or people with disabilities, the amount of rent and the management of the units, which may include a nonprofit housing organization as well. And these are recorded at the land tenure office, and so they're implemented into a secure policy there. And these can also, housing agreements can also be used for new developments as well. We also, tax exemption for rental suites, not a very popular political route, but again, they can provide some incentive for maintenance. Rental conversion and demolition policies, really, a lot of those kinds of policies focus on what happens to the tenants and tenant displacement. And then preferential fee schedules for municipal services as well sometimes help in terms of lowering the cost of municipal services like garbage collection and which will help. Next slide, please. Ensuring that we have a healthy, affordable housing stock means that, in my opinion, that we need to also support nonprofit housing and nonprofit housing development. Through the other, Bernie and Linda's presentations really showed us that there isn't a lot of government support and funding for those anymore, building those anymore, but there are a few things that we can do, I think, to support it within that climate. So, there are the conversion of private rental properties to tenant cooperatives, which I think is an interesting idea. Municipalities can also purchase rental properties. Some of you may know that the City of Victoria has done that. And rental properties can also be purchased by nonprofit housing organizations through things like tax exemptions and grants or other kinds of monetary supports, like the Housing Trust Fund, for instance, or community investment funds, which is something that the Community Social Planning Council is looking at. Next slide. And I'm talking really fast, but I'm trying to get through all of this, a lot of information. So adding to the affordable housing stock, Linda touched on some of these as well in her presentation. Density bonusing, housing agreements, like I said, and then things called alternative development standards, like encouraging smaller units, reduced setbacks, parking requirements, all kind of very technical things, but all they can add up to actually support the development of more affordable units. And housing trust funds, particularly ones that we can leverage and leverage off of each other. So the Big City of Victoria Housing Trust Fund, for instance, can be leveraged with the regional housing trust fund as well. So we made some recommendations to the City of Victoria in a presentation to them after this report was released. Next slide, please. And we really encourage them to think about looking at standards and maintenance bylaws and supporting demonstration projects that use innovative tools like repurposing of church land and smart growth tools. And I know that that's certainly part of what they look at in their planning. But the repurposing of church land is a really interesting thing. And I don't want to get into it for too much, but we see that churches, their congregations are shrinking, but they have some fairly prime property and prime land. And they want to maintain a social purpose, right? They want to maintain their social mission. And so they're trying to, we've been in contact with a couple of church groups here, and they want to make sure that they keep that social mission, but at the same time they need to do something in order to keep their sanctuary. So working with local church groups, for instance, I'm trying to figure out how that they can develop their land to have affordable housing units and mixed use. I'll leave it there. Expanding the use of tax or other incentives. Like I said, some of these are not very politically popular, but I think that we do have limited return tax holidays for some heritage buildings, and I think that those kinds of tax holidays could also be applied to affordable housing development. Ensure the longevity of the housing trust fund is really important, and thinking about inclusive housing policies for income demographics, particularly under $60,000 a year. Next, please. And this is my final kind of slide. Although we made those recommendations to the City of Victoria, I also did want to point out that there are some things that the City of Victoria is doing. They have policies in place around rental conversion and related fees. They do very often use housing agreements. I should say, the municipality does. It's the only municipality in the whole region that has purchased rental units and actively invests in local and regional housing trust funds. They offer density bonuses, and they do incorporate alternative development standards when they can. So, not to say that because those policies in place that everything is fine and dandy, but it really shows that Victoria is a leader here in the region. But there are, like I said, suggestions that there could be more that can be done. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Amongst so many friends, colleagues, a member of my staff, Connie Santon, is here tonight as well. It's lovely to be here. My job tonight, or what I'm hoping to accomplish, is to tell you a little bit about the Greater Victoria Housing Society and the work of housing that makes a contribution to affordable housing stock in this region. I was also asked to highlight some of the more innovative things that we're doing to actually get some affordable housing built, so I'll do that. Next slide, please, Graham. So, Greater Victoria Housing Society, we describe ourselves as a socially responsible, entrepreneurial, non-profit housing society providing rental housing in Greater Victoria. We believe, and I think I'm in a room of people who probably share this belief, that an affordable home is an essential ingredient for our community's social and economic life. We provide homes for all types of low to moderate income households. We provide homes for families, working adults who have a hard time paying full market rents. Our primary group, though, are low-income seniors and people with disabilities. I think for those of you who walk around Victoria, these buildings are all in the City of Victoria. And I picked these three because I thought you might recognize them. And they all provide homes for low-income seniors and adults with disabilities. Next slide. So all three of the previous speakers have described our environment, the world we work in to you. You know, the demand for rental housing is projected to continue. The cost of buying and building housing is very high. And there is some, but not a lot, of government support. So that is the real world of trying to provide affordable housing. Next slide, Graham, please. So how are we responding to this? Well, most of the current housing that we have, I mentioned the slide showed there's 807 units, is actually targeted to the lowest income people in our community. But because of the shortage of funding, we've decided in the meantime to keep on building rental housing that we hope in the long run, because we'll keep holding it in nonprofit ownership, will become more and more affordable over time. But in the meantime, we do have a new market. We're now building housing targeted to young working singles and families who cannot afford or find good quality housing in the market. Next slide. So I'm going to just show you some of the projects that we've recently built and tell you a little bit about what it took to get them built and what some of the maybe innovations are that we had to use to get them built. So this building at 21 Gorge Road East is one of the first buildings that we achieved by saying, okay, we can't wait around for the government to come back with lots of money. So what we did is actually joined with another society. We brought all of our skills and strengths together, and we co-built and now co-own this building. So we got a lot more oomph when you work together with somebody else. Next slide. So it's a 52-unit building, and while it is targeted to people whose incomes are under $65,000, the reality is almost all of the incomes are under $55,000. We call it a family-friendly building. Our goal is to try and provide, they're almost all two-bedroom apartments, but we've done a lot to the building to try to encourage families to come and live with us. Next slide. So I also did want to acknowledge, though, there were a lot of funding partners who did each in from maybe a very modest to a significant way, give us money up front so that we could actually make the sort of down payment so we could buy the land and get the building built. So I think it is very important to acknowledge the governments and the agencies that have stayed in the business to try to work with us to achieve some housing. Next slide, please. So here's, this one might be more recognizable to you in the downtown area. And this is another, example of working with partners. The kind of innovation here was a number of innovations. But one of them is that we actually built this with a investor, somebody who actually wanted to retain ownership of part of the building as part of his commercial real estate portfolio. So next slide, please. One of the more unique things about this is it's actually a conversion from the old light industrial warehouse through to now, if you go to the next slide, providing homes for 25 people. These apartments are all targeted to single and couples, typically younger people who want to live close to downtown, but who are in lower wage jobs. So if you go to the next slide, we'll see how many funding partners it took to get this building built and to achieve the rents that we were able to achieve here. So the community really did see a need for housing targeted to younger working people and really stepped up to help support us building this building. Next slide. Now here's a pitch for those of you looking for somewhere to reprint. We're seeking applications. This building, and I think actually, Marika, you had a picture of it under construction in your presentation. This building is our newest project targeted to lower income workers. It's at 35 Gorge Road in the city of Victoria. And again, this is the second project we're doing where we're doing it with the society where we co-build it and we'll co-own it. So this has a mix of studio 1 and 2 bedroom units. But what was innovative about this project, and for those of you who aren't in the rental market but are looking to buy a home, we're selling 5 townhomes. We built these townhomes. We're building them at quite a cost-effective rate because we're also building a 68-unit apartment building at the same time. So all the profit from selling these 5 townhouses will go to try to reduce the cost of the apartment building and ultimately reduce the rents at the apartment building. So they'll be on the market soon for those of you looking for a lovely home in the Gorge neighborhood. And it's a great community association over there. So next slide. So Now, I thought I'd kill two birds with one stone and start getting my rezoning approvals tonight. This is still just a concept, and we're certainly not at the stage where we're ready to talk to the Community Association. I believe it'll actually be North Park Residents Association. But we're working on a proposal for a 48-unit apartment building with ground floor space that will be owned and used by the Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria. Now, some of the units, because we're in a partnership with them, we've decided that we're going to try and achieve some affordable units for the immigrant and refugee community who are seeking some of the services that Intercultural Association offers. Now, this also speaks to some of the ideas that Marika was putting forward, is that this also is innovative because this project is designed to sit on land that is owned by First Metropolitan United Church. They actually seem to have a fairly robust congregation and aren't facing a lot of downsizing in terms of their congregation. But, you know, their buildings are heritage buildings, they're expensive, they have a lot of costs, and they're looking for ways to make some money to sustain themselves. So the vision here is we would actually subdivide and buy this land from them, build a building that is looks complementary to their heritage church, and then they would have neighbors that they've pre-selected, us and the Intercultural Association. So, now, next slide, please. Now, being also a registered charity, I would never come to an event without saying how you can help us. But there are more things. Well, money is always, it always fits. There are many other things that can help move, the work we do and the work that other nonprofit societies do. For example, we know there are lots of people who have a real passion for seeing affordable housing built in our community, and they can often bring skills, connections, resources that are very valuable. We are always looking for good tenants. Connect us to people who actually need affordable housing. There may be very long waiting lists, but one of the realities is a lot of people on the waiting list need a lot of support in order to live independently. We are a housing society that only provides housing for people who can live independently. We have no staff, we have no kitchens, we're not looking after people. We're caretakers, not caregivers, is kind of our tagline. So the other thing is, we do, of course, when the community will support us through the rezoning process, that's enormously valuable. If you want to build a project, if you've got an inner real estate developer in you, maybe we can do a project together. We're always looking for good new people to have a career with us. Oh no, yes, you can donate. Thank you.
After our discussion, just the microphone's set up right there, so please don't be shy. We'd love to hear what you have to say. So I'll pass this literally over to you, Linda, if you want to kick us off.
It's interesting that none of us talked about the role of the private sector in potentially building more affordable rental housing. And it's been really interesting the last several years with such low mortgage rates that those private businesses that perhaps have had properties in their portfolio for some time are seeing new opportunities as potentially building private rental housing. Now, there aren't too many examples of the Greater Victoria area, I don't think. There's one by Tillicum Mall. But it is... Oh, of course, the Hudson. That's just up here. And there are quite a few units in that project, and that's also private market rental. They're certainly popping up all over Vancouver, San Francisco, Seattle. They tend to be very small units. And are really geared more to single people or small households. But I'm wondering if any of you would like to explore, have any thoughts about the role of the private market?
The study that I referred to earlier in my presentation, I actually did a focus group with some private developers as well as members of the real estate sector. And because, to make sure that we had more balanced research, we wanted to make sure that those voices were also included in that. And I think one of the policies that some of us highlighted, like housing agreements, is a really great way of bringing in the private sector into the development of affordable housing. So, and there seemed a real keen interest from the group that we talked to in the focus group about doing that and helping to find bridging financing and being able to work with nonprofit housing providers to help get financing for the startup, the construction startup, expense stuff. So I think that there certainly is a role for the private sector to play, and there seems to be an appetite in the region.
We get approached quite a lot to work in partnership with the private sector, and it's always a very worthwhile experience to sit down and talk with them. They often have really nice pieces of land and great neighborhoods. They've got some good visions for their properties. The challenge when the nonprofit sector works with the private sector is we have to fundraise before we can come to the table. A piece of land that's for sale, you can't wait a year and a half, which is basically what it would take us. So, that's why that's why it's great to have a healthy private sector, because they actually move much faster, and because they control their own money. And did I say we don't have any money? We've looked at many potential partnerships, but it's just there's a real time mismatch.
I think when this was probably about 2007 or 2008, there weren't that many incentives really for the private sector to get involved. And I think, as you pointed out, it's much more attractive now than it was then to do that. One of the things that we kind of commented on to each other during the break was that each of us, in our own way, brought in the context, and we brought in the main context. And Linda, I know it was officially your job to do that, and I think each of us is so used to bringing that context in. And if you remember, a lot of the context is that we actually privatized the housing market. That's how we actually ended up in this situation. So I think, in addition, we need to look at a diversity of kind of strategies that are available. And I think, Kate, that's what I appreciated in your presentation. You've got examples of housing projects at different parts of the income continuum that people can afford. And then, we can even, and I know there's a couple of people here from Kool-Aid, for example, who are doing supportive housing that would also be at, the very low-end market. So it's that whole spectrum that we need in terms of the solution, along with the tools, I think, Marika, that municipalities can use as well to give that extra bit of emphasis. Are we ready for questions? I think we're ready for questions. We decided we like each other.
So anyone, if you have comments or questions, please come up to the microphone and try to keep them, a minute or under, because I think we've got a lot of people who want to speak.
The provincial government was given $200 million in the last couple of years from the federal government, and they were supposed to build affordable housing, and they said that, we'll build it if there's a need, and they don't seem to be coming across with the money. So why don't they be sued for just to get the money, and because they're not going to hand it over willingly? Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Eric K. I'm a Firma resident, and my question I think is for Marika, I believe it is, from the Canadian Social Planning Council. My perspective, we have a federal government that's been clear. I mean, they're going to do little or nothing for housing. We have a provincial provincial government that's doing some things on the demand side and very little on the supply side. You had one slide in terms of your presentation to the City of Victoria about a series of policies that they could do. I think it was called inclusionary policies for people with incomes under $60,000. If you could, first of all, speak with more details on that bullet. And also, I believe the City of Vancouver has something called inclusionary zoning or something like that, where for every housing development, every sort of new condo development or whatever, they have to provide a certain percentage of non-market housing. So I've always wondered why we don't do that here in Victoria. There's so many new developments downtown, and yet it seems like most of those are high-end and unaffordable. So if you could speak to the feasibility of that policy.
Sure. I think that inclusionary zoning policies have been successful in some jurisdictions, and I think why the City of Victoria doesn't have, I think that's an excellent question to ask the city councillors about, because they are able to have city staff investigate the feasibility of having those kinds of zoning policies. So in my mind, I think that they can actually be quite useful and quite successful. There's no agreement across, but private sector certainly isn't a huge fan of inclusionary zoning policies. One of the things that there's zoning and then there's inclusionary policies. And so zoning is really, it makes, and for those of you who do development, please, I'm a researcher, so I'm not a planner. So I might get some points incorrect here. The thing with policies, the difference between the zoning is like it's more concrete, right? And they make sure that it happens in a particular neighborhood. Well, policies can be applied in a different way. So they don't have to be necessarily stuck in one particular place. So if the municipality has the policy in place, then they can do it in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Whereas inclusionary zoning really is about a specific land use area. So I hope that answers your question a bit, but yeah.
I could just make a comment. Inclusionary housing programs really began in the United States and have been incredibly successful over 30 to 40 years. There's been a lot of resistance in Canada. As a housing planner, we always bring it up, but there's a fair bit of resistance. And just to make a comment, you mentioned about Vancouver having a certain percentage requirement. That's not quite right. They certainly they operate under their own charter, so they have some additional powers. And one of those is to be able to, in each negotiation with the developer, get into looking at community amenity charges and community amenity contributions. Depending on the community, there may be a need for affordable housing, and that would be on the table. But it may well be some other social need that they address.
Thank you.
I just want to thank the DRA for having a superstar panel here tonight. Really good speakers all around. It'd be really nice if maybe your presentations could be up on the DRA website, because there's some really good materials in there. I have a question. You could answer yes or no, but I'm looking for a little more than that. My question is that I work for Kool-Aid. We're a member of the Coalition to End Homelessness, as some of you are as well. And I'm just wondering if you believe that we can end homelessness in the capital region by 2018, which is the goal of the Coalition and also of Kool-Aid, without additional government funding for new construction. And if you could elaborate on your answer. If the answer is no, we need more funding, I'd like your ideas on how we get it.
Feels like I'm the one that ought to start that. Of course, the answer is no, and we definitely need additional government
Well,
investment.
the mayor said we will be able to end it by 2017. I heard him say it.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard him as well as, I've certainly heard the EE say it as well. It's an aspirational goal that can only be achieved if we have an additional investment. And I think one of the most, I'm just going to give you just a sort of a personal aside, but one of the most difficult things for me this year in producing the report that I drew most of the data from for the presentation I gave you was I was walking to share the report with some members of the coalition, and it was very difficult to go in and to say that we haven't added anything in terms of the subsidized and supportive housing, we haven't added anything in terms of the rent subs. That was very difficult, and I will tell you, I felt quite discouraged on that particular day when I was giving the report. And, you know, Ellen, you said you want to know how to do it, and at the provincial level, like I mentioned in my presentation about the need for the national housing strategy, we haven't had, until recently, a lot of support or action, even within our own community, about supporting a national housing strategy. We don't have a provincial strategy. We don't have a provincial housing strategy. So I mean, at the policy level, I really do think, and you know, that's where I am a lot of my focus is at the policy level, seeing that we need to develop a housing strategy, because I mean, Linda, your presentation just makes it so clear in terms of our lack of housing policy. So they're not going to invest until they've got the policies that are there. And a couple of people said this tonight, and I think they said it well, is, you know, the city, and I often say this to the municipal body, they're actually knocking themselves out. I mean, they're buying hotels and refurbishing them. So at a municipal level, but the situation is going to be, it's got to be resolved between municipal, provincial, federal action at each level. And I think we can do a lot more in terms of the provincial and federal policy to set the stage for the kind of investment that we need.
I think we could if the reason for homelessness was exclusively economic. The challenge is that it's not, and so much more needs to be brought into the equation for success to successfully end homelessness. And that, I think, is why we won't achieve it, because it's the whole bringing together of all the health care and other supports. That's you know, to take a slightly different perspective. I don't know what point I wanted to make if I forgot.
We'll just mention that there was a provincial housing initiative, and there was a fair bit of money that added to the supply. That program, I believe, is completed now, but it certainly has made a difference, both in the Victoria area and certainly in Metro Vancouver.
If I can remember my point. We, you know, the new projects I showed you, we have been really, really well supported financially by the city and the capital region. But, you know, you have to think about where are they raising their money. They're raising their money, particularly in the city of Victoria, from a tax base that is primarily renters. So we're actually asking lower income renters to solve the housing problem in large part. I mean, there's businesses too, and there's a large tax base from that, but I think we need a broader pool of tax funds to help us solve this problem.
I agree, and I just want to add one more thing, that there are, there's movement to create a more creative kind of investment tools in affordable housing. So the Community Social Planning Council, I mentioned this briefly in my presentation, we're working on something called a Community Investment Fund, and this is something that's really been quite successful in Nova Scotia things. There's a lot going on in my mind. In Nova Scotia. And what community investments funds do is that they redirect personal and RSP contributions into a pooled community investment fund. And the one that we're looking at developing is going to be a cooperative fund, so they'll have a board. And the idea behind this is that people will be able to funnel their investment funding in that, and then that fund will be able to leverage community benefit real estate, other kind of community benefit projects. And so this is one way, and I'm not saying that it excludes either level of government, the federal or provincial governments and their role in doing this, but I think that we can come up with some creative solutions where our community can pool our money and resources together in kind of new and innovative ways.
Okay, I'm David Turner. I'm from the Committee for End Homelessness in Victoria, and lots of interesting stuff here. It seems to me that we are treading water, but we're actually going backwards. So not making much of an inroad into what's happening.
I couldn't do math, because I kept looking at the numbers.
So that's the problem, one of those issues, and that's one of the things that I want to look at. So let's look about going forward. Now, somebody from the Housing Secretariat said that the tourism industry says that to keep a motel afloat, you've got to have 80 housing. So what it said, can you just think about that for a bit?
I was just saying to Marika, because, I mean, those are spaces that can be claimed, right? And one of the issues that immediately comes to mind is around the zoning piece. I'm not an expert on zoning, but I would guess that is. There's probably someone in the audience.
I think there's a couple of people in the audience.
Who can speak to that? Would that be one of the issues? Because I know, and I think there's people here from the Housing Action Team. I mean, there's all kinds of buildings, and you may recall in Vancouver, one of the strategies that they had, was to basically take their hotels and turn them into the single room occupancy. But I think we could do a bit better than that, because we're not going to create. That's one of the other issues. We're not going to create slum housing. Let's create decent places for people to live on 300 dollars.
Is there anyone here from Kool-Aid?
Yeah, Ellen is.
Oh, Ellen, could you speak to Queen's Manor? Sure. As a conversion?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, the sad thing is, hotel properties are difficult to work with, certainly for supportive housing, which means staff on site. So there's low-income housing, but there's also supportive housing, which is kind of a step up in terms of the services provided to the tenants. So in terms of supportive housing, many hotels and motels have individual entrances to all of the apartments. They're not set up for cooking. There's a lot of issues. So we, for example, inherited Queen's Manor, one of the old Travelers Inns, thanks to the city's actions and BC Housing and others. A lot of conversion was required. If you have to buy these properties and convert them, they're not necessarily cheaper. They may be more expensive, but they can be done quickly, which is an advantage. So there are certain issues with hotel properties, but that can be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But they're challenging property, and not as good as an empty lot, for example.
Somebody asked a question about sources of funding, and I've been involved in 3 real estate transactions, and each time I purchased something, I've paid a not insignificant premium called the real estate transfer tax. And that real estate transfer tax adds to the cost of housing in our region. And I'm surprised that I've never heard much conversation about recapturing some of that to offset and provide affordable housing back in the region.
I think that's a great idea.
How many of our hotels, community and homelessness, a lot of word there. How many of you know about the news program Democracy Now! That Utica hosts? Oh, thank you. They've been interviewing and featuring a woman who won Seattle City Council in the last month, Kashama Sabat. Kashama won on a platform that called for quality, affordable housing, taxing the millionaires. She encouraged to say millionaires, and yet she still won. And the third thing was a livable wage, $15 per hour. She got right to work and challenged Obama on his $10 minimum wage yesterday in the State of the Union address. To great avail, thank you. The point of Democracy Now! That Amy Goodman brings on every evening is that government can do anything if we want it to. It can be benevolent, it can be efficient, it can service the unmet social needs of society. But we have to want that. We have to organize to make that happen. And any tool within the market context only remains a tool that may or may not work until
Perhaps I could respond. Some excellent points. There are 2 trust funds in the region, one of which is a regional trust fund, and indirectly municipalities, directly municipalities are paying into that trust fund, and indirectly has come from a residential property tax.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Loveday. I'm also a North Park resident. And basically, as a couple people have mentioned, is municipal election year. So I would just like to know, and there's been some talk about pressure in politicians at the all candidates meetings and whatnot. I would love to know what is on your wish list. What would you want to see on the platform in terms of affordable housing?
Well, I've got one right off, so I'll start. And, most of my work is people who are on very, very low income. So if they're on a form of social assistance, we need to raise the shelter allowance from $375 to what they can afford in Victoria. Yeah, sorry, oh, I'm on the wrong list. That's what my wish list is. That's right at the top. My political wish list, yeah. But on my municipal wish list, oh my gosh. If we could, and this has only come up a little bit tonight, but on my municipal one, if we could even, get some commitment. I mean, the housing trust fund is clearly one, but even some commitment around the understanding that regardless of what we see in what our thoughts are about homelessness and what we think the problems are, it is still fundamentally a housing problem, and we need to get an investment in the range of housing solutions and working in partnership, I think, as you've identified as possibilities. You probably have some more concrete ones. I'm so focused on federal and
Well, one, I just wanted to add on to what Bernie said is I think that I'd like to see a commitment to actually keep the Housing Trust Fund. Because there's been some rumblings that, and we actually saw it when one of our city councillors made a proposal to drastically kind of cut back on the Housing Trust Fund. I think that maintaining that Housing Trust Fund is fundamental to supporting being able to have a pool of money to leverage other funds. And I also think that it's a housing issue and it's also an income issue. And so I think that having larger employers think about becoming living wage employers actually helps contribute not only to people's income levels, but it also helps contribute to people's ability to afford their housing. So not to say that that's an end-all be-all, but those are kind of two things on the top of my list.
I would like to see the city be continuing to support the development of housing for low-income workers, service workers in our community. Many of them now have a great deal of difficulty finding accommodation or doubling up or tripling up, and some have to commute from long distances. So you have to you consider the transportation costs and the transportation challenges that are presented by that. So the closer that people can live to where they work, the better it is for everyone. And I certainly think that, certainly downtown Victoria, there are so many service workers, be it in hospitality, be it in janitorial staff, be it in healthcare workers, that really transportation costs can be quite significant. So again, building accommodation, rental accommodation in particular, in the downtown and nearby areas.
Certainly, keeping the Housing Trust Fund would be number one for sure. I used to be a policy analyst, which is a bit of a curse, because I can actually understand that it's challenging for the city to be, why should they be taking on the work of the federal and
I know you talked about, you did like a focus group with, I guess sort of the private sector, so more with like private developers, and I was interested in that because I actually work at a part-time job with a real estate developer in Brooklyn Bay. And so he, for years, he's been building like some commercial properties, and mostly condominiums, just throughout Victoria and the peninsula. And it's something I tried to bring up as sort of a development idea, was like, would it actually make sense to maybe, instead of building condos or maybe like $300,000, like I don't really know where the market will be for that, and is it possible maybe to build a building that is, more affordable, or are there kind of other markets to consider besides maybe like the higher end market, and or even the rental market, and it's sort of, I guess maybe it's hard for them to see there. I didn't, but so I was actually wondering what your experience was when you were talking to that group of developers. And
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So we were really focusing on so the research was really around policies so enabling policies for municipalities. So we talked to them as a group about what they saw was helpful for them in terms of enabling policies. And they're not always agreeing with some of the other policy recommendations, but they were really interested in an inventory of available land, right? Because we live in a very, as we know, our land market is not locally determined, right? The value of our land is determined at an international level. And so we're looking at what kind of available land is there that has like some flexibility in terms of taxation or purchasing or that kind of thing. So we touched on that. We also touched on how the development process and how that could be easier because for the private sector. And while as Kate also talked about, it takes to be able to raise the funds to be able to start building a unit, it takes a long time, and as that time goes on, costs increase, and so they had some comments around how to kind of address that too in terms of the permitting process. So I know I'm not really
oh no, it's just it's just sort of like important to me, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, so that was really the purpose of but I know that there are some developers in town who, John Knappett, for instance, he really, and I believe he was, yeah, and so he's a private developer, but he had a strong, keen interest in developing units that were affordable, right? So, I don't know if Kate wanted to speak a little bit about that. He always pops up in my mind as someone who,
I think the difference though is that his goal is to enable another,
right.
He's not going to own or build a rental, at least at this stage, as far as I know.
Yeah.
It's hard to give developers, I think you're seeking ideas so that developers can bring something more affordable or start considering different models.
Yeah.
And I think the best thing is they do actually, need to talk to each other and learn from each other. From time to time, there actually are, meetings and events like this where developers and nonprofit people come together and say, if you only did that, it would be better, and so on. So there's, just look for some opportunities to further that discussion.
Yeah. I was also wondering, like the cost of, I was looking at over the years, like from 2006 to 2012, and as you see rent increases actually kind of by a lot. Like what are the factors? Like why does it shoot up that much? And I understand that since our vacancy has increased, but rent, like the price is actually still quite high. So wouldn't it naturally, usually if you have a lot of something, it's not being sold, usually the price goes down. And I don't understand that much like the rental market. And, like what are the factors that have contributed to increasing it?
This is just sort of a small part of the answer, but when the vacancy rate goes up, the rental rates don't automatically drop. There's often a residual effect that goes over many years. And so if you look at those 6 years of data, you'll see that the vacancy rates have really only started to rise above national levels, which have been about 1.8 in the last 2 years. And so what we're still is the residual kind of effect. The other piece that's happening in those increased vacancy rates, when you look at it broken down by the type of unit, like from a bachelor, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, what is artificially inflating our vacancy rates is the fact that there's a lot of 3-bedroom, very high end of market suites that are sitting empty. That's where the high, because their vacancy rates are, you know, like, I don't know if I can remember them all off, but it seems to be, because we look at it by, broken down by each municipality, is, you know, there's some that are like 7%. So that's what's dragging up. And I was focusing on, you know, the lower end of market suites, where actually the vacancy rates are very, very low, extremely low, so it's hard to find those ones. And so then, the cost of those continue to go up.
And then of course, like property taxes tend to increase every year. Is that kind of a factor that rolls into like rent increasing, I guess? Or?
And our older buildings, our older rental buildings are deteriorating, and so, you know, maintenance on those buildings. I mean, our rent up front, I live in a rental apartment, and our rent just went up because they repainted the building and they actively try to maintain the building. So, and we're in a position to do that, that's okay. But I think that's a small aspect of it as well. But our inflation is going up, and the overall cost of living is going up for everyone, right? So we'll see the rise of things like rent and cost of food and energy. And so if you're living in a rental building that provides free heat, for example, then those energy costs are also going up. Like the gentleman pointed out, you know, we're having, you know, our hydro rates are going up as well. So that's going to also be reflected in rents.
It's even like internet too, like it's just, there's like monopolies or things, you can't find a cheaper option anywhere, right? So it's, okay. All right, so just hold it in. Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, so it's just after 9, so we'll wrap things up. But as I mentioned, we do have the venue for a bit, so please do stick around and to continue the discussion informally. One last plug for the DRA. We've got suggestion jar over here. Victoria Matters is an ongoing series, so if there, you know, we want to look at the important issues facing Victorians. So if you think there's an issue we should cover, please let us know. Put it in the jar. And again, a big thank you to the Victoria Med Center. Huge thanks to our amazing panel. It was really informative and valuable. Big thanks to all